I settled back into the plush leather chair, one of many lined up in the lavish reception hall of the exclusive country club we were privileged to be a part of through my ex-father-in-law's substantial fortune. Glancing over at the clock nestled in the corner, I noted that it was already past 7 o'clock p.m., signaling that it was almost time to head home. Meanwhile, Maya Rivera, formerly known as Maya Baker, continued animatedly recounting the bizarre events that had unfolded in her tumultuous life. As for me, I'm Mason Baker, a 47-year-old geneticist. And yes, a scientist at that, standing at a modest 5'10" and weighing a lean 140 elves. My once brown hair now sported specks of gray, complementing my brown eyes. I believed I possessed several qualities that made me a suitable partner: hardworking, honest, stable, reliable, and fairly knowledgeable in most areas. However, I had been told my charm was comparable to that of a manila folder. If one sought validation for that rather unflattering assessment, they need only look to the woman sitting across from me, whom I affectionately dubbed Idiot Girl. The said Idiot Girl, Maya, sat on the opposite end of the room, holding court as she often did. At 5'2", with striking blue eyes and blonde hair, she seemed unchanged from her college days, still weighing a delicate 110 elves. By society's standards, she was undeniably stunning, but she came with a high maintenance tag. I was well acquainted with the extent of this maintenance, having footed the bill for her surgeries and beauty treatments since our marriage and subsequent divorce. Nevertheless, I harbored no complaints, or at least I didn't voice them. After all, complaining wouldn't alter the fact that I was financially strapped. There she sat, the ungrateful scamp, all dolled up in a $2,000 designer dress she'd probably only wear once. Her 4-inch heels and expensive jewelry were quite the statement. I'll have to find out how much the jewelry cost later on. Those shoes were definitely not practical, but once she sets her mind on something, no one can change it. The dress was quite the sight, a pale blue mini with an empire waist and a tight bodice that accentuated her delicate figure. The plunging neckline didn't help matters either. I secretly wondered if her chest might spill out. The skirted bottom with its short hemline and wispy pleats that wouldn't stay down had been a source of annoyance all day. She was obviously aware of the effect it was having. And those weren't pantyhose she had on. They were thigh-high nylon stockings secured in place with some kind of adhesive. Her seated position practically invited anyone interested to peek right up her dress and see her frilly white panties. Every so often, she'd cross and uncross her legs. I understood her motive. She was clearly trying to push my buttons, and unfortunately, it was working. That stubborn little troublemaker. I wished she would just keep quiet. I could tell she was gossiping about me once again. I observed her. She's been keeping an eye on me just as much as I've been watching her. Look at her, leaning towards the woman next to her. That's Clara Murphy, also known as Mrs. Murphy to Maya and me. She's nearing 70 and was Maya's father's second wife. Maya's dad left hours ago. Nowadays, he's working on finding wife number 4, a young woman from Poland. Maya is from his first marriage. Unfortunately, his first wife has passed away. Maya is whispering and pointing in my direction, assuming I can't hear her words, but I can. Now listen to her. There she goes again. Maya glances at Mrs. Murphy and remarks, "Look at him. He can't fool me for a second. Just see him cringe over there. Why did I marry him? Who would marry an awkward, skinny science geek like him? Well, I'm not leaving, and he's not leaving until I say so." I listen to her. Look at her. She's attempting to mock me once more. Watch as she leans forward, cupping her hands and feigning the need to yell to catch my attention. Maya shouts, "Mason, put your glasses on." Oh no, I forgot about my glasses. Where did I place them? I rummaged through my tuxedo pockets. Ah, here they are. They are horn-rimmed, but I'm accustomed to them. Maya, who refers to them as my horn-rimmed monstrosities, might disapprove, but I know wearing them annoys her. Holding them up, I say, "Look, I found them." She considers herself clever. She assumes I can't observe her clearly without my glasses, but I can see her. I caught her just now adjusting herself with her left hand. I nod politely and say, "Thank you, Maya." Listen to her. She presumes my visual impairment means I can't hear well either. After 27 years, one would think she would know better whether married or not. Listen to her. Maya quietly remarked to Mrs. Murphy, "I have to keep a straight face at this clueless guy. Everyone thinks he's a genius, with all the talk about mitochondrial DNA. But who cares? DNA, my foot." I flashed a sweet smile at my ex-wife, and she smiled back. I overheard her murmur, "The fool who used to be my husband still thinks he can win me back." There she is, pointing at me and saying, "I'm talking about you, so focus." I glance at her and smile. I must endure hearing our story once more. Well, I suppose I should. If I don't, I won't be able to correct her falsehoods. I feel the urge to scold her. I want to, but I can't. Listen to her, the stubborn woman. Here we go again. As I was saying, Maya cast another glance in my direction. It all began in Oslo. He was part of a team of researchers who had uncovered fascinating discoveries about DNA. They found that all Caucasians have traces of Neanderthal in their genetic makeup, and Mason played a pivotal role in this breakthrough. My parents were also present, accompanying our group from England. Fresh out of college and reeling from a recent failed romance, I decided to join the trip. When I first laid eyes on Mason, he looked like a lost child in need of care and support. He seemed so vulnerable, as if he needed someone to guide him through. Grace Perez, a younger woman seated nearby, chimed in, "So you took on the role of his caretaker?" Maya flashed a smile at her and replied, "In a way, you could say that. I was there with my parents and other peers my age, including some old college friends. We all observed Mason and decided to help him out. It was almost like a wager between us." "A wager?" Mrs. Murphy, an elderly guest, faltered. "Indeed, Mrs. Murphy. Mason's initial appearance was far from impressive. While he looked sharp tonight in his white tuxedo, back then it was a different story. His clothes were rumpled and didn't fit well. His shoes were scuffed and brown, his hair a mess, and to top it off, he wore white socks to a prestigious event filled with Nobel laureates. The only constant from then to now are those distinctive glasses. He was undoubtedly in need of some assistance." She glanced at me, her former husband, with a scowl. Sensing that I wasn't fully attentive, she called out, "Are you listening, Missin?" I acknowledged her and felt compelled to explain. It wasn't as straightforward as that. I had been awake all night with colleagues, handling some Neanderthal fossil pieces that required careful wrapping. I was exhausted and didn't have the time to dress up like certain people I know, I cheekily retorted. Brushing off my explanation, Maya turned her attention to the others who had joined us. Mr. Parker, the country club president, and Marcus Reed, Grace's guest. Maya continued, "Quiet, Mason. You were a mess that day. My friends and I made a bet, and I lost, which made you my responsibility. I had to ensure you were presentable." Mrs. Murphy inquired, "You succeeded, didn't you?" "It wasn't a walk in the park," Maya responded. Grace then questioned, "Did Mason know about the bet?" Maya chuckled. "Not initially. It took a while for him to find out." Perplexed, Grace remarked, "So you ended up with a husband because of a bet?" Maya smiled. "He's no longer my husband." I muttered, "Thank goodness," realizing my mistake immediately. "I didn't mean that," I quickly added, noticing Maya's hurt expression. "She divorced me." Maya, regaining her composure, asserted, "I had to. No respectable wife could have stayed with him." Marcus Reed, unfamiliar with the situation, asked, "I'm lost here." Maya leaned back confidently. "Allow me to explain." As everyone leaned in, I interjected, "What exactly are you planning to explain?" Puffed up with pride, Maya declared, "I'm going to tell them about our past." I muttered under my breath, "Oh no." She continued her story, Completing college took me slightly longer due to a skiing accident in my senior year. However, after overcoming that setback, I was able to join my parents in Oslo for the Nobel Awards. That man over there, she indicated her ex-husband, Don Juan, was receiving some kind of award, and he was a mess, as I previously mentioned. Upon discussing it with my friends, we collectively decided that I should assist him. So I took action. Young Grace interjected, "Weren't you recovering from a heartbreak at the time?" Maya responded, "Yes, that's partially true. The guy I was seeing and I had already gone our separate ways because he wanted something from me that I wasn't ready to give up yet." Curiously, Grace inquired, "What was that?" Maya explained, "I was still a virgin then, and I didn't believe that he was worth that level of intimacy. Eventually, I ended up with someone else. But let's return to Mason, or as I was calling him, Jackus. As I mentioned, he needed more than just a bath. My friends and I discreetly escorted him out of the luncheon, where we wouldn't face any significant consequences. After we exited, my friends slowly dispersed, leaving me alone with that oaf over there. She nodded towards me. With a wry smile, Maya recounted, I informed him that since I lacked transportation, he had to take me home. Unfortunately, he didn't have a car, so we opted for a taxi. Interestingly, I ended up footing the taxi fare as Mason had no money on him. Together, we returned to where my parents and I were staying. I convinced him to accompany me upstairs, where I changed into more casual attire. I cut in. What she means is she took her bra off. Maya glared at me. Shut up, Mason. This is my story. Anyway, I took my bra off and changed into a cute mini skirt and white blouse. Then I told him we were going shopping. I took him out and bought him an entirely new wardrobe. Can I add something real quick? I asked. Maya gave me a wary look. Make it brief. This is my story. Sure, I replied. But this is actually our story. Most of you have heard it before, but the gist is Maya tried to play Professor Henry Higgins to my Eliza Doolittle. Reed laughed. Oh, like Pygmalion by George Bernard Shaw. I nodded. Exactly. She gave it her best shot. Maya reclaimed her narrative. I would have succeeded, too, if he weren't so stubborn, she muttered. Still is. Grace joined the conversation, in My Fair Lady, to Professor Higgins. I smiled. Yeah, that was all Maya's doing, too. Maya cut in. Hey, remember whose story this is? We all leaned back, letting her continue. Maya resumed. So I dragged him to a high-end clothing store. My dad's rich, so money wasn't an issue. Just his ridiculous pride. She pointed at me accusingly. But I fixed that. How exactly? Grace asked, curious. Maya grinned widely. I have my ways. Now where was I? Oh yes, the new wardrobe. Then we went to a barber, and I made sure he got a proper haircut. I cleaned him up nicely, except for those idiotic glasses. I can't wear contacts, I interjected. Maya pouted. Tell me about it. So I bought him some new clothes, and with about 2 weeks to spare, started taking him out. I wanted to show him off now that I'd reclothed him. Somewhere along the way, the skinny idiot fell in love with me. I had no idea. He found out I lived in London and got reassigned to a research center in England. By the time I got home after the 2 weeks, he was already there. He had rented a flat, bought a cheap car, and began stalking me. Mrs. Murphy raised an eyebrow. Stalking you, you say? Maya reconsidered. Not exactly stalking. He started calling and asking me out. I told my friends about the American idiot who had fallen for me and kept following me around. Some were the same friends who had tricked me into the bed. They took it a step further. Somehow they convinced me to seduce Loverboy over there to get him to propose. I interjected. I didn't know any of this. Grace asked Maya, did you seduce him? Maya continued. It was like taking candy from a baby. Here's a guy who graduated high school at 15, went straight to university, then to graduate school, and right into research. He knew about intimacy, but had never had a real relationship. Honestly, I sort of felt sorry for him. Within a month, he was head over heels in love with me. Marcus Reed asked, "What happened next?" I sat back, curious to see how Maya would handle this. Maya's tone softened. He really did fall for me. I mean, he truly fell in love. I didn't expect it. Grace nodded. Yeah. Maya's voice grew quieter. He asked me to marry him. Reed inquired, "Did he get down on one knee?" Maya glanced at me, clearly not expecting to discuss this tonight. Yes, he did get down on one knee. In fact, she sighed. He did it in a restaurant in front of a dozen of my friends. We were at a nice Spanish place. Everyone had been drinking, except for Mason, who stuck with water and iced tea all night. She paused and smiled faintly. Imagine iced tea in a Spanish restaurant in England. Anyway, almost from nowhere, a musician appeared with a mandolin and started playing something sappy. I interrupted. He was playing Somewhere Once Upon a Dream, and it wasn't sappy. She nodded shyly. Yes, it was. It was very sappy, absolutely sappy. But you made it even worse. She glanced at the others. Oh yes, he got down on one knee. My friends were clueless. I was clueless. Then he pulled out this little box, opened it, and took out a ring. He held it up. And I cut in again. I asked her to marry me. Mrs. Murphy inquired, "What happened then?" Maya fell silent, finally replying. All my friends started to laugh. Grace asked, "Oh my, what did Mason do?" Maya continued, "Nothing. He didn't know. He just knelt there, staring at me, so sincere." The love on his face was palpable. I felt like a complete jerk. He looked like a lost puppy. Gradually, my friends realized he was serious. One by one, they stopped laughing. He stayed there holding this silly ring, looking at me. He began to sense something was amiss. He asked, "Am I out of line here?" I was so stunned I couldn't find words. One of my friends eyed the ring and said, "Oh, how nice, a 1/4 carat." I was mortified. Another friend grinned at me and said, "Looks like you won." Mason turned to me and asked, "Won? Won what?" Mrs. Murphy's displeasure was evident. I never heard any of this before. Maya shrugged. Even after more than 27 years, that night could still bring tears to her eyes. She added, "He had no idea it was all a joke, a stupid, dumb joke." I never imagined, he seriously. He had actually fallen enough in love to want to marry me. And then he asked me right there in a public restaurant. I spoke up. I was stupid, I guess. Maya looked at me. "No, you weren't. I was cruel. All that time, I never saw you as a person. You were just a game to me." It was then that one of my friends cleared things up. He looked at Mason and told him, "We made a bet with Maya. We bet she couldn't get you to ask her to marry her." Maya gulped. I never dreamed he'd go that far. To ask me, and in public, no less. Seeing the look on his face, I suddenly realized 2 things. First, I had done a terrible thing. And second, I guess I realized I'd fallen for him too. Grace chimed in. "What happened then?" I kept quiet, letting Maya continue. She looked at Grace, then at each of us, ending with me. Even after all this time, I could see she was deeply moved. Maya recounted. Mason, he handled it like a man. He leaned back in his chair, put the ring away, and then said something like, "Wow, I didn't know. That's a good one. Guess the joke's on me." Then he looked at me, smiled, and said, "It's late. I guess I'll be going." He got up slowly, pushed his chair under the table, and added softly, "I don't want to spoil the rest of your evening. Maybe you can get a ride home with one of your friends." He then leaned over, kissed my cheek, and walked out of the restaurant. I was stunned as he handed the matron the cash and pointed to our table before disappearing. Reed inquired, "Then what happened?" Maya sighed. I just sat there, feeling like a complete fool, not just because I had humiliated a wonderful man, but also because it hit me that I wanted that ring, that silly quarter-carat diamond ring. Imagine that. My father is worth millions, and I got 2-carat diamond earrings when I was in grade school. Reed prompted. You got up and went after him, right? Maya shook her head, saying, No, I didn't. My friends were laughing, congratulating me on my prank. Some even joked about how we made a fool of a Yank. I laughed along with them, but I cried too, not from laughter, but because I felt a deeper, different pain. Curious, Grace asked, What happened next? Maya continued, We stayed for another hour or so, then I went home alone. I called his flat, but there was no answer. The next day, I went to see him, only to find out he had already left. I went to the university where he had been doing his research, and they told me he had already been there, quit, and was returning to the States. Reed asked, What did you do then? Maya replied, First, I went home and had a good cry. Then I called Heathrow, but he hadn't booked anything there. I called around and found out he booked a flight out of Luton to Germany, not heading straight back to America. Grace asked, What did you do next? Maya confessed, I went crazy trying to find him, desperately needing to apologize and most of all, to tell him yes. I interrupted her. If I may, Maya, I can fill in from here. Maya nodded, so I continued. I was really upset about the whole bet situation, but I never cared about the size of the ring. I knew her family was rich, but the ring was a symbol to me. I felt pretty stupid, not angry, just foolish. I kept berating myself, knowing better than to fall for someone so different from me. I was a working-class kid from Scranton, Pennsylvania, and she was from St. John's Wood. I put the ring away and made a promise to myself to never make a fool of myself over any woman again. From there, I journeyed to Germany. I transferred all my paper records from England back to the United States. With some cash in hand and a newly bought backpack, I decided to take a few weeks off. I was in my early 20s and wanted to explore a bit of Europe before maybe heading home to Pennsylvania to relax for a while. Mrs. Murphy looked at Maya and frowned. And you? Maya responded, Yes, I did. I decided to find him. First, I went home and told my mom and dad about the bet, and then I told them I was going to get him. Maya paused before continuing. You might expect me to say my wealthy, self-centered parents didn't care. But that wasn't true. At first, they were furious about the bet. They liked Mason a lot. She pointed at me. They thought he was amazing. Up to that point, I had been a bit of a wild child. Not promiscuous, just undisciplined. My parents saw qualities in Mason that I was only beginning to understand. He was young and innocent in many ways. But he was a real man. Not the macho kind. He was steadfast and resilient. Maya coughed, obviously holding back tears, but she continued. My parents were frantic. I was their only child and had already had a bad skiing accident. They were terrified of losing me. They made me promise to call every night. With Dad being a government official, he had the means to keep track of both me and Mason, especially if Mason used his credit cards. So you chased him all over Europe, Grace inferred. Maya grinned. No, not at all. I'm not stupid. Mason's a geneticist and had done research using rare Neanderthal DNA. I correctly guessed that the first place he'd go would be Niender, Germany. I checked the flights, got one to Cologne, rented a car, then drove to Düsseldorf, the Neander Valley, and finally Niender. Was he there? Did you find him? Reed asked eagerly. Yes, I did, Maya confirmed. He was there. And then? Reed pressed. Well, I found him at the museum, Maya replied. Grace cut in. Yes, and then? Maya smiled. When I found him, he was looking at some tiny artifacts with his thick glasses on. I ran up behind him, turned him around. He's skinny, so it was easy to move him. I turned him around and said, "Yes." "What did he do then?" Grace asked. Maya replied, "First, he asked me if this was part of the bet. I told him no, that I meant it. Then I asked him for the ring, and guess what? He had it in his pocket. He took it out and put it on my finger." She reached for the thin gold chain around her neck. "I don't wear it on my finger anymore because we're divorced, but I keep it here, close to my heart. Look, it's the same ring, and the wedding band too. See, the same quarter carat." She held it out for everyone to see. Reed leaned back with a satisfied expression, like he had just finished a good book. "Ah, so you two got married, and have lived happily ever after since?" Maya glanced at me. "No, first we had our 3 kids, and then I divorced him." Reed's face filled with confusion. "Why? Did he leave you? Did you leave him?" I jumped in, no and no. "She divorced me because she's stupid." Reed looked back and forth between us. "I don't get it." I glared at Maya. "Go on. Tell him. Stupid." Maya shook her head, the way she did before starting one of her fake crying acts. She murmured, "I have my reasons." I was fuming. This had been eating at me for years. "If you don't tell them, I will." Maya threw her head back dramatically and lifted her dress almost to her waist. "Look." I'd seen this act many times, so I just sat back and watched. Grace stared at her legs, then her behind, then her face. "What?" "I don't see anything." Reed cast a quick glance her way, but his eyes settled on me. "I don't see anything either." Maya adjusted her dress back down. "I have a degenerative neuromuscular condition." Grace looked bewildered. "You have something like multiple sclerosis, so you divorced your husband. That makes no sense. He didn't give it to you. He couldn't." I clapped my hands once in mock applause. Another intelligent remark. Grace stared at me, unsure if I was being sarcastic or mocking her. Reed interjected, "I still don't get it." I attempted to clarify. "It's not MS. It's related to a skiing accident she had in college, which has progressively worsened over time. We've been dealing with this for years, and we've exhausted all surgical options." Maya added more fuel to the fire. "I can never get better. I'm going to end up confined to a wheelchair or bedridden, a helpless invalid." I turned my head sideways. She's on one of her stupid binges again. Maya spoke up once more, her voice tinged with desperation. "Don't you see? I'm a cripple. I can barely walk." She gestured to a young man standing in the shadows of the corner. "That's our son. He's here to take us home." "That's my wheelchair." She pointed to the chair beside him. "Maybe you didn't notice, but both before and after the wedding, Mason had to half carry me in and out of the church. I can only walk a few steps. I can't do anything by myself anymore. Mason has to do everything." I raised my arm and motioned for our son, Robert, to come over. He started wheeling the chair toward us. Reed scratched his head incredulously. "Honestly, Mrs. Baker or Ms. Rivera, or whoever you are, that's the most ridiculous reason for a divorce I've ever heard." I raised my right hand, forming a fist. "I agree. I wholeheartedly agree." Maya seemed on the verge of tears. "You don't understand. Mason, this idiot here, leads an active life. He needs a whole woman, someone he can share those activities with. We used to go skiing, mountain biking, scuba diving, rock climbing. Now we can't do any of those things because of me." Grace interjected, "So you two live apart, but for events like today's wedding," she said, referring to our older daughter's wedding, "you come together." I laughed. "Not at all. In a few minutes, we will both be getting into her specialized vehicle. Robert will drive us home. We'll go upstairs as we always do, and later tonight, we'll entertain each other in bed. In fact, with only a few minor modifications, our lovemaking will be just as passionate, intense, and meaningful as before. After we've been intimate, I'll go downstairs and fix us something to eat. Maybe we'll watch TV or read. Either way, we'll do it together. Married or not, we are a couple. Reed, as if summing up my wife's flawed logic, remarked, "So she got hurt. She decided to divorce you so you could do the things you two used to do, but you both still live together, still make love. And if I might add without being too forward, you two are still very much attached at the hip." I nodded. "You've got it," I said, glancing over at Maya. Her lower lip trembled in a pre-tear pout. "Maya," I gently chided. Maya wiped away a tear and defiantly flipped her hair back. Mr. Parker, the club president, smiled. "Mr. Baker, Ms. Rivera, if it's all right with you, we'd like to finish cleaning up so our people can go home. It's been a busy day for them." Knowing Cameron Parker well, I responded, "Sure, I apologize for overstaying." I walked over and scooped my wife into my arms. Smiling at my son, I added, "Looks like I'll carry her to the car." Maya wrapped her arms around my neck. "Sorry, Mason. I think I'm a bit tired, maybe too tired for church tomorrow." I kissed the top of her head. "That's okay, sweetie. We were in a church today." Then I paused. "Do me a favor, will you?" "What's that, darling?" she asked. "Marry me again," I proposed. She replied wistfully, "No, but if we hurry home, I'll." She leaned up and whispered in my ear. I kissed her head again. "Okay, I'll let you, but only if you let me." I whispered the remainder back into her ear. She snuggled her head under my chin. "That seems fair," she said, kissing my neck. "You know we're living in sin, don't you?" I squeezed her tightly. "That's because you're silly, sweetheart." Her grip around my neck tightened even more. "Oh, I love you so much, but I want you to be free." I kissed her again. "Oh, just shut up." And that was the end. A short epilogue. They never remarried. Maya, aware that her illness was gradually weakening her, was resolute in her belief that Mason should be free to live his life without any burden of guilt. However, Mason struggled to convey that his freedom and happiness were inextricably linked to her being a constant part of his life. Whether married or divorced, they remained together, side by side, completely and unequivocally united until the end. And that's how it remained. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.